I have done zero preparation for this. Um, Rosie is sleeping. I have her monitor. If you hear a noise, then it's an indicator that I need to go take care of that. This is video journal number 34, and it is 9 days before my 35th birthday. So this felt appropriate. I was thinking that I might write in a journal tonight, but I have feelings about that that maybe I'll get into. I decided to do this instead. And as you can tell, something looks a little different, right? I ended my journey of growing crazy hair, and that ended with GDC 2022. So I'm trying to pull up a photo really quick because, again, I didn't prepare for this at all, of how bad it got. Here we go. This is who you were previously talking to, and now this is me. So why the change? I saw a video that I had uploaded to my previous YouTube channel, my main YouTube channel, that was dated April 9th, I guess, 2020, just about 2 years ago. And in that video, I talked about what needs to exist in order to make it so that resources can move from institution to institution, supporting society so that everybody can benefit in the best possible way. And I framed it starting from the perspective of, imagine that you are the ruler of the universe and that you have all of the things that you might possibly need, and because you have all the things you might possibly need, you go off in search of other acquisitions, including media and nations and armies and resources and blah 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 blah, um, and broke that all down to these things need to exist and exchange resources as necessary in order to manage this worldwide kingdom. And that doesn't necessarily have to fall on some individual who rules it all. That can easily fall on everyone through some practice of self-rule. So long as these institutions are open to input and feedback and can adapt and share resources as necessary to provide the best situation for all involved, then there doesn't necessarily need to be anybody at the helm. It's an interesting thought I've had about how we have representative uh, democracy, right? How we have institutions, state institutions that require representation. Why do these things require representation? Why can't we just directly speak to what we feel on a particular issue? And the reason for that is you need to be informed. You need to be adequately and appropriately informed about what these things mean and what they could result in. And we don't currently have that. We have a very poor system of education for most individuals. And by that I mean media that we interact with. How you find out what's going on in the world. Finding out what's going on in the world is a very important way, a very important means of knowing what actions to take. So if you imagine you're leading a project, you want accurate reporting on what's going on in that project in order to understand how to manage resources to achieve some end state for that project. You want to know what your users are saying. You want to know how the tests are going. You want to know how progress on tasks is looking. You want to know where your resources are being spent, whether or not they need to be reallocated, whether or not your access to resources has changed, whether or not risks have been realized. You want all of this information in pretty much real time so that you can make the appropriate decisions for your project. And a good project manager doesn't make these decisions in a vacuum. They socialize these challenges to their team. They're open and honest with their team about what challenges exist and source ideas from the team on how best to handle it, because again, the team are experts in their own areas. So it's pretty much the same deal, that you don't need leadership in a ruling sense. You need participation and feedback from everyone involved, and they need accurate, up-to-date information. And so, yes, you can certainly take the king out of a kingdom and still effectively run a kingdom, so long as the people are able to represent their desires, their desired input and desired end states, but they need some mechanism for understanding. And that's really where the challenge is now for me, is trying to figure out that mechanism for understanding. And I have taken to calling it a story. I've taken to calling everything really a story. Some perspective that as an individual will power you to do what needs done in all these circumstances. And it means different things at different times. So that's where I can come into my haircut. Starting 2 years ago, I went down this long path of what's best, what's right, and pretty quickly found that there's not really a good answer for that. There's not a good answer for what I was looking for. What I was looking for is some ideology or some story or some answer that I could relentlessly pursue and would be energizing to me. Some perspective on what reality really is, what life really is about, what the answer to sociology and economics should really be. And that would empower me to uh, be relentless in my pursuit of employing that answer. And my relentless pursuit of that answer and making that answer a reality would draw people to that cause and sort of signal a shift in the way things would work. Well, what I seemingly was thinking about or talking about was revolution, and um, what I then became was sort of an ideologue in my pursuit for an ideology that would make all of these answers obvious and attractive. And of course, that means a charismatic ideologue. And of course, that means a dictator, right? So all of these desires that I had for some passion that would pursue me toward enabling and bringing a better way of living through structure that other people could buy into and could replace the current system were really all the same story throughout history of somebody thinking they knew a better way and the world shifting gears, which it is done over and over and over again. And the majority of these ideologues are simply narcissists. And by all means, I fit into that category. But it frustrated me that I couldn't find an answer that checked all of those boxes and still allowed me to make choices that aligned with what I thought was right and best. So, what are some examples of that? Everybody has free will. Everybody has equal opportunity. Everybody gets to make decisions for themselves. Everybody has equal input. There's no one institution that governs the will of all the others. Sort of what I was just referring to. You know, you need the ability for everybody to have input. And so, I guess something that crystallized out of all of that is that the one way in which I could really contribute to anything is to be some means to assist people in breaking down and breaking up concentrated power. So you always look for where is power concentrated and you seek to redistribute it. That allows it so that anybody who's looking to introduce a better way of structuring a city, introduce a better way of handling climate change, introduce a better way of a better product to the market. These people all have a chance of doing so because there's not consolidated power that prevents outside input. So breaking down power structures really seems to be the one thing that came out of all of that that I think is has some value. But in terms of like being a power structure and implementing a system, no, it just smacks too much of dictatorship, an aspiring dictator. And So I had to look in the mirror, and for a long time I didn't like to look in the mirror. Um, so I grew my beard long and grew my hair long as a way of sort of lamenting, mourning this death of the idea that I could be something special to history or humanity without being something evil. Uh, that sort of is what it means to be special in this sense, I guess. To do good, well, I guess you have to define what's good. And so this is where I'm falling back on the story part. Um, we like to tell stories about what existence is, and by telling stories about what existence is, we can build certain aspirations of how to make that existence better or more palatable or more just or whatever it is that we think is right. And we play roles that allow us to assign virtue to ourselves. So our understanding of what the world is and what existence is the starting point for us to help understand what virtues are worth obtaining and what actions are worth obtaining to get those virtues. Um, so for me, it still falls back to define existence. If you can define existence, then you can really set the stage for everything else. Problem is, stories are sort of a human thing, and existence is not restricted to human understanding. There's a lot about our existence that doesn't fall into a neat hero's journey, and that makes things quite uncomfortable for me or for anybody else. So we like there to be obvious patterns to things. We like there to be obvious directions to things. And telling a story brings these things about, allows us to interact with the world in a way that makes sense. But they don't naturally exist. So you lack a firm foundation for translating the natural existence, natural reality into some sort of virtue that can be actionable. There are some of these that we kind of take for granted. Preserving human life is one that we take for granted. We are humans, therefore, one of the things that we think is good in all cases is preserving human life, saving lives. Um, you can look at that in the context of the Anthropocene and see that humanity has grossly populated the planet, and that our continued overpopulation of the planet and growing population on the planet is leading to, um, global uh, disease and um, global warming. So, depending on what your position is on those things, um, increasing the human population to the greatest extent, preserving human life and promoting human life to the greatest extent. Depending on your question, it's not really for granted. You can't really take that for granted as a good thing, especially if you take the position of how much death is involved in processing food to keep all of these humans alive. We have a very efficient, streamlined um, food industry, but it involves an incredible amount of suffering and death for non-humans. Um, so, you can challenge your basic premises about what constitutes good if you wanted to. You'd probably be considered a crazy person because there is no unified theory of good, right? You can't come up with a unified theory of good at present that encompasses not only all human beings on the planet, regardless of race, religion, ideology, or nationality, as well as all fish in the sea and dolphins and sharks and chickens and cows and sheep and pigs, and flies and mosquitoes and ants and mice. We don't have that. We don't have that framework. And I don't think it. I think as soon as you start building a framework to include more things, you start seeing how many things are excluded. So there's not an objective framework of good. There's not an objective framework of how to do right unless you start making assumptions like to preserve human life, to promote human life is good. Um, where was I going with all that? Necessarily, there's a story involved. And the bigger and more encompassing the story is, the more you can build on top of it to figure out how value should be attributed to individual acts and to ways that people interact. So I still really do covet that sort of unified theory on morality, which is what is the least misrepresentative way to apply some story to existence that would allow individuals to act in a way that would um, align to their concept of acting virtuously, allow them to assign virtues through action and participating with this story, to allow them the independence and self-actualization necessary as a living biological creature with a certain biological composition and predisposition to feel that they're living the way that they should be living as an organism, and that would ultimately result in the best all-around quality of life or outcomes. And again, you'd have to define what's a desirable outcome. So your story is encompassing all potential definitions of morality, and your story is built to achieve some outcome that is the most desirable of all outcomes for humanity, which needs to be defined. And in between, it needs to have the ability for individuals to participate in a way that allows them to feel uh, some degree of virtue by acting in a way that brings about your desired outputs, as well as fulfilling to them as a biological creature. So there's a lot involved in that. But if you were able to draw that big of a circle around everything somehow, you would have functional progress within. Of course, it would only last as long as people were capable of continuing to believe it, which means that it really genuinely would have to be as close a fit as possible to observable objective reality, so that it would take an incredibly long time or be incredibly inconvenient for somebody to dislodge that thinking, and therefore everybody sort of abandon the virtues and outcomes that you had imagined. It's a heck of an endeavor. It implies understanding the minutia of input to culture and sociology and economics, and what the output then would be at the other side. And that level of prescience doesn't exist. Um, so, do you do you simply appeal to the way that people are constructed as an organism and allow them to feel personal goodness and hope that the outcomes will be as you intended? No, I don't think that's the right way to go about it, because in the end, the outcomes are the part that you care about, right? You're building a system for some reason to achieve some end goal. You want the best for everybody. All right, let me back up from all of that, because, again, the ego involved in this conversation is immense. Why, why venture down this path? What's the reason for making any of that conversation, any of that discourse? I think I think there's some degree of mimetic triumph in establishing an order. Um, Genetic triumph, of course, is making sure that your progeny dominate the world by reproducing more than any other organism in your class. Mimetic triumph is ruling the world through ideas, such that your idea becomes the most dominant, absorbs and defeats lesser ideologies, and spawns several more. So it's a mimetic conquest that's at the heart of that endeavor. Again, no different from anything previous in human history. And I don't think that there's necessarily anything virtuous about it. Aside from the fact that one might say we want the best outcomes for all, or we want the best outcomes for humanity. But um, I've got the camera pointed at me, right? So for me, this must be about me. And that's the part that's really hard to deal with. And that's what ended up causing me to cut my hair. Um, I got lost in this process of trying to figure out what's best for people. And who am I to even try to participate in any of this discussion? And I decided I needed to get out of my basement for a little while, so I went to California and went to Game Developers Conference, and like always had a great time. I went in full armor. Well, not full armor, but mostly armored. Um, don't feel the need to explain this a great deal, but it had a couple of different meanings. One of which was this is how I interact with the world now. I am armored. I am more faceless. I'm not, I don't have an identity in and of myself, and I don't necessarily feel like I interact as my genuine self with most of the world. I feel deeply guarded and distrustful and recluse, among other things. But when I went and, armored up and was incredibly hairy, I still walked away with the feeling that this life, this life, this person, this flesh, uh, is worth a damn. And so I just ran with that because I haven't felt that since this all began. I haven't felt that feeling that this individual, this life, this flesh is worth a damn since COVID started. Um, and it's a good feeling. It's an addicting feeling. It's an fueling narcissistic feeling that as an individual, I am worth something. And so since that time, I have been trying to reinvest in my individual self. The problem is my individual self is, and always has been, a combination of feeling deeply egotistical and special and this desire and will to help people. They're inseparable because as soon as I start trying to do good for myself without that bigger picture of how I'm going to save the world or whatever, however you want to phrase that, uh, my ability to serve myself is incredibly limited. I don't have my wagon hitched to any particular star if I'm just looking out for myself. So it's this weird two sides of the same coin where for 2 years I floundered in anguish over the fact that this selfish creature, for some reason, thought that it could save things when all evidence points to no, there's not really a common definition of save here. Um, it's individual creatures competing for prominence and organizing along ways that are most individually beneficial to collective ruin over and over again. Um, we're individual creatures as well as societal creatures, and the society only works insofar as the individual willfully participates in it, and the individual does not willfully participate indefinitely. There have to be incentives, and those incentives change over time, and they change relative to how high functioning the society is. So um, the better off we are collectively, the less incentive we seem to have individually to maintain our collective well-being. Um, anyway, what was I getting at? I was dissatisfied with being that kind of creature, and therefore did not feel that it warranted me participating at that level because I could only deceive myself in believing that I had some answer to this question when there's not one. However, if I give up on all of that and say, I'm just going to be the best mammal that I can be, um, I can't be that great of a mammal unless I'm to some degree self-deceived. The ambition to achieve just really isn't there unless you come up with some way that things ought to be, right? Like, unless there's some common good, unless there's some definition of the ideal to work toward, what are you working toward? To be 15% better than you were the previous day? How do you know that your efforts are not wasted? Um, how do you know that you're headed in the right direction? That's another thing. I think that I have been very easily manipulated by my circumstances throughout my life because I've always felt that, well, given this is the way that I've spent the last 15 years of my life, let me add up my min-max scores and figure out what direction that's going to send me in. These are the things that I've managed to achieve. These are my strong points. These are my weak points. So I'm going to forget about whatever I was trying to do here and say, I'm going to keep my highest numbers, right? If I've only got five potential directions to select, then I'm going to pick my five highest numbers and go whatever way that suggests I could go. So I've been very pragmatic about how to live my life based on the things that I've had experienced previously, which implies that I believe that I have some kind of potential, right? That word scares the crap out of me because it was the first thing that somebody said when I had an enormously above average score on a PSAT. This score only represents your potential. And so I began to perceive potential as this thing that every second you have 100 points to earn, and most seconds you will not achieve those 100 points. You will learn, you will get at best maybe 90, or most of the time probably 0 or 10. So for every second that you're not living your potential, you're losing your potential. So you always have to keep your highest numbers so that you can move further on towards your potential, which really means allowing life to guide you in some direction, allowing the circumstances around you, the incentives around you, to drive you in a direction. The opposite of that would be that somebody picks something like writing or art or engineering, or let's be more specific, making shoes, making rocking chairs, doing character modeling, and they just compete with themselves continually to be the very best thing, the very best at that thing. And that's never been of interest to me. It's never been of interest to me to beat myself. It's always been of interest to me to maximize my score among others. Um, and that's probably just because of the way that I was given or interpreted incentives when I was younger. So that makes a fairly directionless person lacking some greater meaning, lacking some greater story. And so that's the thing that I'm trying to work on. I and went too far in both directions. I went too far in one direction to say I alone can solve it. Went too far in the other direction to say we're all just sort of existing here, and I'll do whatever I want to make life comfortable for me as an individual. I can't have all the things that I want as an individual unless I can convince myself that I know what's best for everyone so that I can really take advantage of that leadership potential. But I can't convince myself that I know what's best for everyone because I just don't think that such a thing exists. So it's a paradox, and it's going to require some degree of self-deception moving forward for sure. But the goal is, just whatever degree is reasonable, to come up with that story that contains the recipe for actions that um, biological creatures would want to take to live their best life, become self actualized, and achieve the virtues that they want to achieve as an individual, and result in the outcomes that are best for humanity, or however big your circle is. If you want to include dolphins and chickens and cows in that, by all means. But it's a challenge no matter what. It really makes me want to get into simulation. It really makes me want to open up Unity game engine and start putting in variables and saying, what if I tell everybody that yellow is holy? Then how's everybody going to act? Is everybody's preference for yellow all the time and going to change the way that they um, interact with the world and for the better? It really makes me feel like building a simulation, right? Because how do you test it? Moreover, is it worth making assumptions that are not testable? Would it be better to just go the AI ML route with this and say randomize conditions until you get an ideal society? And then if the AI says, just tell everybody that spots are the thing you want to have and stripes are the thing you don't want to have. And that alone, that objective nature of existence will compel people toward actions that are compatible with them as an individual and result in the best outcome for all. Wouldn't that be interesting? That could be a good purpose for AI. That sounds fun. It sounds enjoyable. But just conjecture without evaluation is probably unlikely to result in that end state. However, all right, so let's say if you really, really want to base it on outcomes, what's the best possible outcome for everybody? And you factor into that individuals that participate are going to want to achieve individual glory and virtue, and they're going to be biological creatures with biological incentives, that's just a matter of building the history's most complex simulation and going with the results. But what if your goal is simply to be compelling? What if your goal is simply to resist falsification and be generally enticing to individuals? What if your goal is simply to catch fire quickly and reach the largest audience and be the most influential in that category of information throughout history? What if you want your story to be foundational to human understanding henceforth? And that's good enough, right? So at this point, you're not even really testing your outcomes. You're just saying, this reads well. People are into this. Well, at that point, you are a full-blown dictator, in my opinion. At that point, you are a full-blown ideologue. You are uh, leveraging the veracity, the compellingness of your narrative and your appeal to other humans for whatever selfish reason they find your content appealing, and leveraging that toward prominence. And who knows what that prominence might mean. People love backing a winner, right? So the idea is at some point you're going to rise to prominence and you're going to be some sort of ruler. And if it's going to be um, you're establishing your kingdom for 1,000 years or whatever, then that's a pretty significant position of leadership. It's a pretty significant consolidation of power. And as I said 30 minutes ago, consolidation of power is the one thing that I think that I've found in this personal 2S something year journey is worth fighting against. Consolidation of power seems to be the one thing that that if you just always fight against consolidation of power, things will probably be okay in general. The more you break up major consolidation of power, in general, I think the better things will be for everybody. Wow, I guess I can say something objective about existence, human existence, is that the whole purpose of this endeavor is fraught with evil, and the only kind of evil that I feel comfortable naming. Um, so it's tricky. It's tricky. How do you? Hmm. Hmm. Is it important that this journey results in any degree of personal glory? Would it be worth it to pose some theory on existence that ends up being true and good for all humanity for thousands of years and uh, not be personally attributed with it or at all? Especially if somebody else was, somebody that you don't know, because we're going to introduce some really great thinking. Somebody's eventually going to come along and claim it, right? Like that's a free resource. Uh, an unclaimed ideology, you got to make that subject to the state ASAP, and then put limits on its application, of course, because the state can't be broken up. Whatever entity that exists. So no, it has to be owned, right? Because if you don't own it, then somebody else will own it, and somebody else that owns it will be an established power that you then can't break up, and it'll become perverted, and the teeth of whatever that message is will be lost, so that that established power can continue just by absorbing what aspects of your ideology are compelling. So it has to be owned, and you have to be willing to fight to preserve it tooth and nail, and you have to be willing to stand with it until it thrives, which means beating out all other potential powers until this can permeate. But of course, at that point, you are the power. So what can you do aside from invite everyone to, feast on your on the corpse of your rise to power once it's run its course? No, I don't. It's recursive. I'm talking nonsense. It made sense for a little while, but I think I've lost it. So, Journal 34. 34 years. In 9 days, I'll be 35. I've said that twice. Said that twice. This creature is a knowable entity. It's just like all the other creatures running around out there. I don't know. At some point, I must have said during the past 35 minutes that the goal is to do good, right? I've learned to avoid using that terminology because defining good is very difficult, and to use it in shorthand is very cheap. To say I want to do good, gosh, you might as well have said I want to do something, because until you say what your concept of good is, it's impossible. Especially when you say I want to do the most good. Because then it's, well, okay, so what you're saying is you're going to be picky about the good that you do. And what then is your definition of the most good, which is what I'm trying to say here, that I want to do the most good. Um, just throwing that back out there as a general term. But I had a conversation with a friend today, and he said, well, of course you could always just go down the street. Here's the place where you could donate blood. Well, of course you could always send $100 to this charity and they would feed 10 people with it. I can give you more ideas if you like, but just pick a charity, uh, send some money, and you will have done good. You will have done more good today than you did the previous day, because you've championed some cause. And of course, that struck me to the core of my ego because it's, well, let me think about this for a second. I could give blood, or if I wanted to do the most good, I could come up with a campaign that would encourage as many people as possible to give blood and make that a regular recurring thing and an essential part of our society, that this is what people do. Or I could start my own charity and I could put my name on the front of the building, right? And that would be I would advertise and say, this is what we want to accomplish, and therefore this is why we need your support. So immediately I started thinking, quote unquote, bigger and avoiding the immediate need in front of me to do good. So what does good mean? And what does it mean to do the most good? And what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? And I think the conclusion that we came to at the end of that conversation is that what I'm talking about here has nothing to do with doing good and everything to do with being a common mimetic ancestor among future humans. It's just biological incentivization. Why else would I care? Maybe it's a nurture, maybe it's a nature. I don't know. People seem to continue to encourage me in this direction. All right, I'm getting too introspective. I feel like I covered some stuff. What story, because I think it is story, could, as closely as possible, represent objective reality and existence in a way that human beings could understand a storyless existence while remaining roughly non-falsifiable, resilient to critique. So what's something that you could say about existence that's so true that people would have a hard time um, uh, generally dislodging it from the collective consciousness, conscience, um, even though stories are human concepts and existence is not a story. And then, if you can come up with that, You would also want it to create the best possible outcomes for all people, or all existence, however big you want to draw that circle, and be something that people can interact with, that human beings, that biological creatures can and will interact with, because it meets their self-actualization, it meets their biological incentives, and it allows them to personally ascribe themselves virtue for participating in it. And why achieve all of that? Well, for shits and giggles. Um, so that you can have a page in a history book, I guess, so that you can be a well-loved and well-known author, a great philosopher, an ancient king, right? Sure. I think I had said at some point, it seems to be that we're all here on this ball to try to get a high score. Sure. I like games. Um, but you have to go into it eyes wide open, clear-eyed, that this is, at its heart, a game about conquest and domination. And it's the same story that humans have fought and died for. More importantly, caused others to fight and die for throughout history. You have to be able to draw a line in the sand between what it is that you're trying to do that's good for people and what it is that makes you like an ideologue dictator. Because one of those things is fine and another is not. Maybe the goal then is to simply die before you can be a ruler, before you can come into your own as a, a person that has to somehow enforce an institution of power. I don't know. Can you sow the seeds of your own demise? Can you say 1, 2, 3, repeat after me? Let's break up these big guys, and then you break up me, um, and establish a pattern that way. But of course, you run the risk of, whenever that first cycle completes, once you've relinquished your control, which necessarily you need to in order for this to work, because so long as there is a consolidated power, so long as there's consolidated control, it necessarily will become the source of ills. Who's not to say that the next person will come through and take advantage of the situation and use your history and lineage and credibility and ideology to build their own consolidated power on the back of your uh, invention. So I guess there's another requirement, another critical to quality factor, which is it needs to be resilient to ownership. It needs to be resilient against uh, the consolidation of power, or being used for the purpose of consolidating power. Oof, that's hard, because as soon as you become like encyclopedia entry, your name, reference to your name, if you are a good person and do good things, becomes referential power. We do things in the spirit of Gandhi. We do things in the spirit of Einstein. We do things in the spirit of Jesus Christ. You reference an individual, you draw power from their identity, their ideology, their contributions, and you can abuse it, and you can consolidate power around it. You can wield it as a tool for consolidating power. Well, whatever. I mean, as long as people still understand that they have to beat against the consolidated power, right? I'm sure that the mass media would not remove the teeth from that message, right? And simply just keep the parts that suit the established order. There's not an answer to this question. I'm not going to grow my beard out again, though. Uh, uh, how then shall we live? Think small thoughts, let go, be a normal average human, raise children, have a job for a few decades, grow some tomatoes. Hmm. I mean, you can either live life and it was a fun free trial and that's it, or you can try to do something with it. You've been given a gift. You should try to make something of it. I would like to craft my own life in such a way that people say, if I crafted my life in that way, that would be an easy way to make my existence above average in value or add significant value to my life. I guess it depends on how you define value. Okay, circling the drain. Um, I like having these conversations. I like putting these things out there. I like establishing milestones of like, here's where my thinking was at this time. All you need to know now is that I went into a direction of trying to understand what the answer is to these questions, and for 2 years, and all it ever got me was longer hair and a longer beard. And at some point, I decided, you know what? I just want to be a successful individual. So I'm going to start wearing my suit again and shaving my face and cutting my hair and being that. And then I realized, oh, shoot, without a compassion for all existence, I can't be nearly the individual I could have been if I wasn't deceived in thinking that I had an answer. So I do still seek to be deceived in that regard. I seek to believe that it's possible to move in a positive direction with how human understanding is structured regarding the nature of existence for the purpose of betterment, universal betterment. I would love to become convinced that even some progress is possible in that regard. Because as soon as I can become convinced that that's possible, I can become an unrelenting force to bring it about, and in doing so, greatly better my own self. It's two sides of the same coin. If you don't care about people, you can't become all you can become as an individual, and you have to permit yourself to become something as an individual if you're going to pursue any poor misguided attempt at bettering other people. But by the grace of God goes me when you look at all those other dictators throughout history. Risky endeavor. I don't like it. Don't like it. Don't like those odds. Need the odds to change. The odds of doing something good for everybody doesn't necessarily have to go up, but the odds of becoming a great force for evil need to go down. Above all, do no harm. First, do no harm. Primum non nocere. Nocere? First, do no harm. Okay, that's about it. Rosie stayed asleep the whole time. Now I have to sign off. 49 minutes. Okay, thank you, and talk to you next time. If there is a next time. All right, bye.